he looked indestructible. Muscles carved like stone, a thunderous takedown, and eyes full of fury. Kevin Randleman fought like he couldn't be stopped, and for a time, it seemed like nothing could. From the UFC to Pride, he went toe-to-toe with giants, threw them across the ring, and smiled through every war. But behind that gladiator mask was a man in constant pain, pushing a battered body past its limits, ignoring infection, ignoring warning signs, and trying to stay relevant in a sport that forgets its heroes. In 2016, his heart stopped, but long before that, his body had already broken. This is the tragic story of Kevin Randleman, the warrior whose spirit never quit, even when everything else did. Kevin Randleman didn't just grow up fighting, he grew up needing to fight. Born in Sandusky, Ohio, in 1971, he came from a family that knew poverty, pressure, and survival. He was one of 11 children packed into a household where toughness wasn't optional. The streets were unforgiving, and so was life at home. Early on, Kevin's body began to change into something most had never seen, an explosive combination of raw muscle and animal speed. But while others saw intimidation, Kevin saw desperation. "I wasn't fighting to be a star," he later said. "I was fighting to get out." He found his path through wrestling, and it was there that his legend started to form. At Sandusky High School, he was nearly unstoppable, but it wasn't until college at Ohio State University that his name began echoing on a national level. Under the tutelage of head coach Russ Hellickson, Randleman would become a two-time NCAA Division I national champion and three-time finalist, earning his place as one of the most dominant collegiate wrestlers of his era. His athleticism was absurd. Opponents described him as a blur and a brick wall at the same time. He could launch someone across the mat before they knew they were being taken down, but Kevin wasn't just known for his power. He was known for his unpredictability. He had a wild streak, a kind of intensity that made coaches nervous but kept fans glued to their seats. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to obliterate. Every match felt like a declaration, "You can't break me." Still, despite the accolades, Kevin wasn't made for the clean lines of amateur wrestling forever. The controlled environment clashed with his chaotic energy. And when MMA came knocking, an unregulated, raw, blood-splattered sport still forming its identity, Kevin saw an arena worthy of his chaos. His body was made for it. His pain tolerance had been forged in life long before the cage, and his wrestling skills? They were a weapon no one had yet seen unleashed in this new world of no-holds-barred combat. He was still in his 20s when he left the mats and stepped into the octagon. But behind the scenes, something was already happening, something invisible. Kevin had been pushing his body to its breaking point since high school, and while the crowd was about to see a monster, his muscles were already starting to decay beneath the skin. And this was just the beginning. When Kevin Randleman entered the UFC in the late 1990s, the sport was still trying to explain itself to the world. It was brutal, unregulated, and often dismissed as a sideshow, but Kevin didn't care. He wasn't there to explain. He was there to dominate. And in 1999, he did just that, capturing the UFC Heavyweight Championship in just his second year of professional fighting. His performance against Pete Williams was textbook Randleman: relentless takedowns, suffocating pressure, slams that echoed through the cage. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't technical in the way purists preferred, but it was violent, efficient, and unforgettable. He wasn't a martial artist. He was a human explosion. The UFC had seen brawlers. They had seen wrestlers. But Randleman, he was something else entirely. Still, for all his power, Kevin's reign was short-lived. After defending the belt once, he faced Randy Couture, a legend in the making, and lost. It was a hard fight, a tactical fight, but it exposed something that would haunt Randleman for the rest of his career: the mental side of the game. Kevin fought with instinct, with rage, with momentum. When those things failed him, when he had to slow down and strategize, he sometimes faltered. And yet, even in defeat, Kevin left his mark. Fans weren't talking about wins or losses. They were talking about the sheer physicality. They were talking about that walkout, out, the 1,000-yard stare, the veins popping out of his arms, the way he sprinted into the cage like it was a gladiator pit. Win or lose, Randleman gave you blood, but behind the scenes, he was starting to fall apart. His training methods were outdated and punishing. He would push through injuries that needed surgery. He would fight when his body was screaming to stop. He didn't believe in rest. He believed in proving something to himself, to his coaches, to the world. And so when his back began acting up, he ignored it. When his shoulder tore, he iced it and trained harder. When his muscles began to cramp and seize and tear from the inside, he laughed it off. He wasn't built for self-care. He was built for war. Still, there was something about Kevin that drew people in. He wasn't cocky. He wasn't playing a heel. He was real. He was fighting because it was all he knew. And while other fighters saw the UFC as a stepping stone to money or fame, Kevin saw it as a proving ground, a place where pain meant something. But the toll was mounting, and his next move, leaving the UFC for Japan, would become the defining chapter of his fighting life. Not because he would win, but because he would lose spectacularly. In 2002, Kevin Randleman made the leap from the UFC to Pride Fighting Championships in Japan, a promotion that, at the time, offered both the biggest names and the biggest risks. In the world of Pride, the rules were looser, the matchups more brutal, and the spectacle turned up to 11. It was the land of giants. Mirko Cro Cop, Fedor Emelianenko, Rampage Jackson, Shogun Rua, and Kevin didn't hesitate. He ran straight into it. He wasn't there to pad a record. He wasn't there to cherry-pick opponents. He wanted the biggest, most dangerous names, and he got them. One fight in particular became legend: Kevin Randleman versus Fedor Emelianenko. At the time, Fedor was the most feared heavyweight in the world, undefeated, untouchable, and seemingly unbreakable. Kevin, the massive underdog, entered the ring with nothing to lose. And then he did the unthinkable. He picked up Fedor, twisted him mid-air, and slammed him directly onto his neck with such force the entire stadium gasped. It looked like the fight was over. It looked like Fedor's neck had shattered, but Fedor survived, and within minutes, he submitted Randleman with a kimura. But no one remembers the submission. They remember the slam, because that was Kevin. Pure, shocking violence. That same year, he faced Cro Cop, a kickboxer so feared that even the toughest men hesitated to stand with him. Kevin didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, threw a massive overhand, and dropped Cro Cop cold. The Pride crowd erupted. It was the biggest upset of the year. Kevin had arrived, not just as a contender, but as a true Pride legend. But behind those triumphs were broken bones, aching joints, and a storm of internal damage. Japan loved him, but it didn't take care of him. Fights were frequent, recovery was rare, and pain management was archaic. Randleman was turning into a legend, but at the cost of his life. And while his heart roared louder with every fight, his body was beginning to shut down. Kevin Randleman's strength was undeniable, but beneath that chiseled exterior was a body under siege. By the early 2000s, the damage was compounding, and fast. Years of slamming opponents, overtraining, and neglecting basic recovery had left his system in a constant state of inflammation. Torn ligaments, dislocated shoulders, damaged vertebrae, none of it stopped him. But it was the unseen damage, the silent rot, that would become the true enemy. In Pride, there was little time for healing. Fighters were expected to stay ready, and Kevin didn't want to be forgotten. He fought through staph infections so severe that they left deep tissue damage. One particular infection, contracted through a small cut that went untreated, grew into a flesh-eating bacteria that burrowed into his muscles and created abscesses the size of softballs. He kept training through it. When asked why he didn't stop, he answered plainly, "If I sit out, they'll stop calling, and then I'm done." It wasn't just infection. It was the mental weight of living in pain. Kevin's joints were locking up. His back would seize without warning. He walked hunched over some days, struggling to extend his limbs, but he still went to the gym, still hit the pads, still convinced himself that his spirit could pull his body along for just a little longer. Doctors told him to take months off. He took days, then got back to work. It was an unspoken rule in old-school MMA: if you're hurt, don't let anyone know. Injuries meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant replacement. And Kevin, despite all he had achieved, feared being replaced. Not because of ego, but because fighting was all he had. No backup plan, no savings cushion, no business ventures waiting for him, just the cage. Even when he wasn't booked for a fight, he trained as if one was coming, pushing through ruptured discs, pushing through shoulder impingements that made it nearly impossible to lift his arms. And when the pain finally became too much, he didn't rest, he just medicated. Over-the-counter pills, muscle relaxers, a cocktail of whatever would let him survive another session. His team noticed. They begged him to slow down, but Kevin wouldn't. He couldn't. His nickname was the Monster, but monsters aren't supposed to feel pain. And even if they do, they don't show it. What people didn't see was what happened after the cage door closed and the cameras stopped rolling. Kevin Randleman would retreat to his hotel room or home and collapse, sometimes unable to move for hours. The adrenaline that had carried him through fight after fight would drain from his body, and he was left with only the agony. He rarely talked about it publicly, but those close to him, his wife, his coaches, his closest friends, knew the truth. His days were scheduled around pain. He'd wake up and lie still, waiting to see which parts of his body still worked. Sometimes it took 30 minutes just to roll out of bed. Some mornings he couldn't tie his shoes, and yet by mid-afternoon, he'd be training again, throwing heavy shots, slamming training partners, and pretending nothing was wrong. It wasn't just pride, it was fear. Fear that if he stopped, the world would forget about him. And in a sport that eats its heroes and moves on, that fear wasn't unfounded. The new generation was rising. Names like Wanderlei Silva, Rampage Jackson, and Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira were becoming stars. Kevin's name was still respected, but his phone was ringing less. Sponsors didn't come. The money wasn't secure. He wasn't a businessman, a commentator, or a gym mogul. He was a fighter. That was all he had ever been. And now, the fighter's body was crumbling. He began spiraling into anxiety and depression. The physical pain fed into mental pain. He'd question whether any of it had been worth it, whether being the Monster had brought him anything beyond a broken frame and a fleeting spotlight. There were days when he felt invisible, when the applause of fans from 5 years ago felt like echoes he could no longer hear. And then there was the guilt. Guilt for not being able to provide more for his family. Guilt for the worry in his wife's eyes when he collapsed on the bathroom floor from exhaustion. Guilt that his children were seeing a version of him that couldn't play, couldn't run, couldn't even walk without limping. But he hid it all because Kevin Randleman wasn't supposed to be human. He was supposed to be indestructible. By 2009, Kevin's body reached a limit even he couldn't ignore. A minor skin infection turned into something catastrophic. A staph infection entered his bloodstream and spiraled into a condition called MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. The infection spread so aggressively that he was hospitalized for weeks. One doctor said if he'd waited another 24 hours, he likely would have died. And then, during one of those hospital stays, Kevin's heart stopped. He went into full cardiac arrest. For a moment, he was gone. No pulse, no breath, no heartbeat. Miraculously, they revived him. But what remained was a man in his late 30s, broken in ways that couldn't be seen, organs damaged, muscles hollowed out from antibiotics, lungs scarred from pneumonia, and emotionally, a new fear had crept in, one he'd never felt before: mortality. For the first time, Kevin Randleman, the Monster, knew he was mortal. The invincible image he had built for himself had shattered, and though he survived, part of him didn't come back from that hospital. The part that believed he was unbreakable, that was gone. In the months that followed, Kevin made a push to reinvent himself. He started doing speaking engagements, visited gyms, began working with younger fighters, and while his heart was in it, his body wasn't. Even simple travel left him exhausted. He'd spend hours on the road, only to sleep for days after. And yet, he smiled through it, always smiling, always upbeat, always trying to inspire others. He didn't want pity. He didn't want sympathy. What he wanted was purpose. But even as he tried to build a life beyond fighting, the damage done in the cage and the gym was irreversible. He never truly got better. He just got better at hiding how bad things were. And in 2016, his heart, ravaged by years of stress, infection, and punishment, finally gave out for good. Hollywood. He was only 44. Kevin Randleman's life ended not in the chaos of the cage, not in the spotlight of a grand retirement speech, but quietly, in a hospital room in San Diego. He'd gone in for what was expected to be a routine visit. Pneumonia had hit again, something he'd battled before, but this time, his body didn't have the reserves to fight back. On February 11, 2016, Kevin's heart stopped, and it didn't start again. The MMA world was stunned. In an industry that's seen countless careers rise and fall, his death cut deeper. Because despite everything he endured, Kevin had kept a low profile. He wasn't on big UFC broadcasts. He wasn't running a high-profile gym or trying to stay in the news. He was just trying to live, trying to recover, trying to keep going in his own quiet way. And now, he was gone. The flood of tributes came in fast. Dana White called him one of the most charismatic and talented heavyweights of all time. Fighters like Mark Coleman, Josh Barnett, and Frank Mir shared stories of his intensity, his loyalty, and his resilience. But what stung the most for fans and friends alike was the realization that they hadn't seen the end coming. There had been no farewell fight, no public health warnings, no long goodbye. He just disappeared. And that disappearance was symbolic of something bigger. Kevin Randleman's legacy was enormous, but uncelebrated. A former UFC Heavyweight Champion, a Pride mainstay, a fighter who helped shape the modern era of MMA with his raw athleticism and fearless matchups. But when his body broke down and the spotlight moved on, the industry didn't come running back to honor him. He died, like many pioneers do, underappreciated and underprotected. There was no pension, no long-term care plan, no safety net, just a man who gave everything to a sport that wasn't yet mature enough to give back. A man who slammed through legends, electrified crowds, and paved the way for a generation of superstars, and who died without the comfort of knowing his story was finished. Kevin Randleman's death didn't just mark the end of a fighter, it marked the end of an era, one where warriors bled for the future of a sport that would eventually leave them behind. Even as his body crumbled, Kevin Randleman's soul burned bright. Those who saw him in his final years said the same thing. He was still the monster. Not because of his physique, but because of the intensity in his voice, the spark in his eyes, and the way he made people feel when he spoke about fighting, about family, about resilience. In his speeches to young fighters, Kevin never sugar-coated the truth. He'd talk openly about his mistakes, how he fought through infections, how he ignored doctors, how he let pride dictate decisions that hurt him in the long run. But he didn't speak with regret. He spoke with warning. "Learn from me," he'd say. "Don't wait until it's too late." He never turned bitter. Despite being overlooked for commentary jobs, passed over for Hall of Fame consideration while he was alive, and forgotten by some promotions, Kevin stayed loyal to the sport. He believed in it, believed in its ability to change lives, even if it broke his own. His wife, Elizabeth, once said that Kevin woke up every day trying to be a better version of himself. That behind the monster was a gentle, loving man, one who cared deeply about people, about legacy, about purpose. His social media, though sparse, reflected this shift. He wasn't chasing attention anymore. He was chasing peace. That's what makes his death so haunting, because Kevin had finally reached a place where he was ready to slow down, to teach, to inspire, just as his heart gave out. He was planning to expand into mentoring, helping kids through wrestling, maybe even starting a foundation for fighter health. But he ran out of time. In 2020, the UFC inducted him into the Hall of Fame, posthumously, 4 years too late. It was a powerful moment, yes, but also a sobering reminder. Why do so many of MMA's pioneers get honored only after they're gone? Why does it take death to acknowledge sacrifice? Kevin Randleman's spirit never quit, but the world quit on him long before his heart did. To the casual fan, Kevin Randleman was a slab of muscle and rage, a human highlight reel, the guy who German suplexed Fedor Emelianenko and made arenas erupt. But behind the monster persona was a deeply human story, one of insecurity, pain, hope, and loyalty. He wasn't a villain, he wasn't a saint, he was something rarer, a man who gave gave every ounce of himself to his craft and asked for nothing in return. He could have walked away sooner, could have cashed in on his name, taken safer routes, embraced the role of aging legend, but he didn't, because that wasn't who he was. Kevin didn't fight for money. He didn't fight for fame. He fought because it was the only way he knew how to exist in the world. And that's what makes his story so heartbreaking, because in the end, he was left to navigate chronic pain, financial struggle, and medical neglect alone, with no spotlight, no mainstream coverage, just the slow fading of a legend into obscurity. He died at 44, but parts of him had been dying long before that. Every infection, every ignored warning sign, every day he woke up unable to walk properly. Those were moments when the sport failed him, when the community he helped build didn't show up for him. But Kevin never complained. He smiled, he fought, and when the end came, he faced it the way he faced everything else, in silence, with strength. The monster may be gone, but Kevin Randleman's story is not. It's a cautionary tale, a tribute, and a rallying cry to honor the fighters who built this sport, to protect the ones still here, and to never forget the ones who gave everything and got nothing in return.